It's kind of a head-scratcher, isn't it? Brexit happened years ago, but just this week, the UK and the EU had their first proper sit-down summit since they officially parted ways.
Right. It really makes you realize this isn't some clean break. More like an ongoing navigation.
Exactly. So on this deep dive, we're going to try and get a handle on exactly where the UK and the EU stand, 5 years down the line.
And we've got some good sources to draw on.
We do. Some recent news analysis from NPR, a surprisingly straightforward breakdown of the Northern Ireland Protocol actually found on Reddit, believe it or not.
Yes. Sometimes the clearest explanations come from unexpected places.
And also a detailed economic look, focusing on post-Brexit London, from Cambridge Econometrics.
So the goal today?
The goal is really to give you the clear, essential insights into this evolving relationship. We want to cut through the noise, without getting totally bogged down in endless detail.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the current state of play, maybe starting with that summit.
Okay. Well, what's fascinating right out of the gate is how the NPR piece characterized the current relationship.
How so?
Not as some grand reunion, definitely not, but more like divorced parents figuring out the logistics, co-parenting, essentially.
That's quite an analogy.
It is, but it captures that practical acknowledgement on both sides. Despite the split, they still need to cooperate on certain things.
Right, the practicalities. What kind of things are we talking about?
Well, we're seeing this in talks about fishing access, for example, student work visas, even like which e-passport gates travelers can use.
So the nuts and bolts, the everyday stuff that still needs to work between two neighbors, basically.
Precisely. Two very closely connected entities finding their new footing. But it also means navigating these conflicting priorities. The UK is focused on sovereignty, the EU on protecting its single market.
And that creates friction, I imagine.
Definitely. The ongoing tensions around the Northern Ireland Protocol are, a prime example of where these differing priorities clash, even within this need to cooperate.
Right, the everyday practicalities. But the NPR analysis also makes it crystal clear about the red lines, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. No ambiguity there.
The UK isn't considering rejoining the single market or the customs union. Full stop.
And they're definitely pushing ahead with their own independent trade deals. That's a core part of the post-Brexit strategy.
We've seen that recently, right? Agreements with the U.S. on steel, aluminum cars.
And that significant trade pact with India they've been working on.
So while there's this need to work together on some levels, that fundamental decision to operate independently on trade is firmly in place.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the NPR piece highlights that a major driving force behind Brexit in the first place was this desire for greater control over borders, immigration.
Still a huge issue.
A really significant and, frankly, often debated issue in the UK. You see the growth of parties like Reform UK, Nigel Farage.
And even the Labour Party adopting some similar language on immigration controls.
Yeah. Exactly. It indicates that the sentiment isn't fading away. It really underscores that for a substantial portion of the UK population, that feeling of losing control over who could enter the country under EU rules was a core reason for leaving.
And it continues to shape the political landscape. These firm stances on trade independence, regulatory divergence.
Yeah.
It's all tied into that desire for border control.
Deeply intertwined, yes.
Now, let's shift gears slightly. The NPR analysis also points out the significant geopolitical backdrop influencing all of this.
Yes, the wider world context. Crucial.
Specifically, the war in Ukraine and the shifting approach of the U.S. to European security. This is where it gets really interesting.
Absolutely. The war in Ukraine has somewhat unexpectedly created a stronger incentive for the UK and the EU to work together, at least on defense and security.
Both major supporters of Ukraine.
Right. And there have been discussions, apparently, about potential peacekeeping efforts down the line, collaboration there.
And this is happening just as the U.S. role feels, less certain.
Exactly. The whole conversation under the Trump administration about alliances, NATO funding, it's pushed both the UK and the EU to think more about strengthening their own independent defense capabilities, increasing spending.
So these external pressures are kind of forcing the UK and EU towards cooperation on security, even if they diverge elsewhere.
It seems that way. How this newfound security collaboration, or perhaps the limits of it, might then influence the economic relationship, the trade dynamics. That's a key question, especially when we look at those economic models later.
It's almost like these external pressures are forcing a certain level of alignment, even after a major divergence like Brexit.
And the NPR piece also touches on the volatile global trade environment.
suggesting that maybe being part of larger trading blocs might seem more attractive in such uncertain times.
Well, it raises a crucial question about the UK's long-term strategic thinking, doesn't it? While the pursuit of independent trade deals continues, the instability in global trade could prompt a reassessment of the advantages of closer ties with a major bloc like the EU.
So it's a dynamic situation. Geopolitics and economics constantly interacting.
Always.
Okay, let's move on to one of the most intricate and politically charged aspects of this whole thing. The Northern Ireland Protocol.
Ah, yes.
The protocol.
The Reddit thread we looked at actually offers a surprisingly clear, almost explain it like I'm five, breakdown of the core issue, which is helpful.
It really is. What's particularly valuable in that Reddit explanation is its straightforward way of outlining the central problem.
Which is?
Well, you have the Good Friday Agreement, the peace agreement, which relies on an open border with the Republic of Ireland. No hard border on the island.
Crucial for peace.
Absolutely. But then, post-Brexit, the UK is outside the EU's rules, which generally requires checks on goods moving across an external EU border.
Yeah, conflict.
A direct conflict. The Reddit thread puts it well. There's no good place for the line. Put a hard border on the island, you risk the peace process. Put a trade border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Well, you create a division within the UK. It's like trying to untangle a really messy knot, isn't it? Every time you pull one string, it seems to tighten another.
That's a good way to put it.
And the proposed solution, as the Reddit thread explains, is essentially that trade border in the Irish Sea.
Yes, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Which means goods moving into Northern Ireland need to meet EU rules.
Correct. So that the border with the Republic of Ireland can remain open for goods movement without checks. So the border on the island stays open for people and compliant goods, but there are checks on goods arriving in Northern Ireland from Great Britain if they don't comply with EU standards.
Okay, makes sense.
And the Reddit discussion also highlights a really interesting trend, shifting public opinion within Northern Ireland about the protocol.
Oh, how so?
It mentions a survey showing increasing support, which suggests that some people in Northern Ireland might actually see benefits in the current arrangement.
Benefits like?
Particularly in terms of continued access to the EU's single market for goods. That's a unique position. It could also reflect a feeling that Northern Ireland's economy hasn't been as negatively affected by Brexit as, say, other parts of the UK, precisely because of the protocol.
Fascinating. So a solution that was initially hugely controversial might be gaining more acceptance as the practical realities sink in.
Possibly. And the Reddit thread also included a comment that I thought was spot on.
What was that?
Observing that media coverage of Brexit often focuses on the political maneuvering, the arguments, the personalities.
Rather than the actual practical consequences on the ground.
Exactly. Using the Northern Ireland Protocol as a perfect example, the news gets caught up in the drama.
Yeah, that tracks. It overshadows the tangible effects on people's lives, on trade flows. Understanding the mechanics, like that Reddit thread tries to do, is crucial for seeing past the headlines.
Definitely.
Okay, finally, let's dig into the economic impacts. Specifically focusing on London, using that Cambridge econometrics report as our guide.
Right. This report aims to model how Brexit is actually affecting London's economy.
How do they even go about doing that? Sounds complicated.
It is complex. What's important to understand is how they approach it. They use a sophisticated model called E3ME.
E3ME.
Yeah. Think of it like a detailed simulation of the UK economy. It's built using official government data, national accounts, things like spending, trade, employment.
Okay.
This allows them to make more informed projections because it considers how different parts of the economy interact dynamically. It's not static.
And it looks specifically at Brexit's effects.
Yes, the report specifically examines how migration, trade, and investment, all key areas impacted by Brexit, are affecting London in particular.
Got it. And what are some of the main assumptions they bake into their sort of central forecast?
Well, one key assumption is an increase in what are called non-tariff barriers between the UK and the EU.
Non-tariff barriers, meaning what exactly? Like paperwork, regulation?
Exactly. Things like customs checks, regulatory hurdles, paperwork stuff beyond just taxes or tariffs on goods. It reflects the new complexities of trading. Now the UK is outside the single market and customs union.
Right. What else?
They also make assumptions about migration. They project long-term net migration levels similar to official ONS forecasts, but and this is important, that they assume migration from non-EU countries won't fully compensate for the decrease in migration from EU countries.
And that could have consequences for London.
Significant consequences, potentially, especially for sectors like hospitality, retail, construction sectors that historically relied quite heavily on EU workers in London.
So potential labor shortages in those areas.
That's the implication. The report does note the high numbers of, say, student visas and the British national overseas visas from Hong Kong issued after Brexit, but suggests these might be temporary factors, not a permanent replacement.
Interesting. And they also consider things like carbon pricing, don't they?
Yes, environmental regulations play a part too. The model takes into account the differences in carbon pricing between the UK's own emissions trading scheme and the EU's ETS.
How do they differ?
In the model, UK carbon prices are projected to be lower than the EU's in the initial years. This difference in carbon costs could affect the competitiveness of certain industries, obviously.
Makes sense. And investment.
Investment is crucial. The report really emphasizes the role of investment, which is a key driver in their E3ME model. And investment is heavily linked to expectations about future economic output, future demand.
Business confidence, basically.
Absolutely. It highlights how important business confidence is in a post-Brexit environment. Think of it like a weather forecast.
Okay.
The forecast is based on current data and models of how the atmosphere works, right? But unexpected things can still happen that change the outcome. Similarly, economic models like this give us the best projections based on what we know now and the assumptions made about the future. But they are still projections.
Got it. So what does all this modeling actually suggest in terms of the impact on London's different sectors? What's the bottom line?
Well, the report provides projected average annual growth rates for broad sectors in London, looking ahead to 2035. The detailed breakdowns are deep in their appendices, but they do touch on the outlook for major sectors like manufacturing, financial and business services, and so on.
But these are projections, not predictions.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that. They're based on the model and its assumptions. Changes in government policy, unforeseen global events, these could certainly influence the actual outcomes quite significantly.
So to bring it all together then, it really does seem like the relationship between the UK and the EU 5 years after Brexit is just a really complex picture. No simple answers.
Far from it. You've got this practical need for cooperation in certain areas sitting right alongside these very firm red lines around sovereignty and trade independence.
And the Northern Ireland Protocol remains this incredibly delicate balancing act, with maybe shifting public opinion, adding another layer.
And the economic consequences, especially for a global hub like London, are still being modeled, still unfolding, still being fully understood.
Absolutely. I think understanding these interconnected dynamics, how trade links to geopolitics, links to regional issues like Northern Ireland, links to these economic models, it provides really crucial context for making sense of the current situation.
Those aha moments really come when you start to see how all these different pieces of the puzzle actually fit together, or sometimes how they don't fit smoothly.
Right. Okay, so here's something to think about, a final thought for you. While the headlines often shout about the political disagreements, the underlying necessity for practical cooperation, and these long-term economic adjustments we've been discussing, they strongly suggest that the story of Brexit is far from over.
Definitely not over.
So what other unexpected areas of convergence, or maybe divergence, might we see in the next 5 years as the full implications continue to unfold? It's definitely something to keep mulling over.